Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. My name is Steve Kazan. I'm the moderator MC today for this NSITSP webinar that we put on pretty much every month. This session in particular is focused on cybersecurity and specifically CMMC. And there are lots of meaty topics or discussion points around this topic. And we're, I don't know, blessed is the right word, but we're fortunate to have a great panel today of experts. Joy Beeland, Andrew Crawford, and Mark Jennings are joined us, and they're going to talk about is CMMC a good fit for your business, which is kind of the key question that we're trying to answer today. We want this definitely to be interactive, so please ask questions in the chat or the question function, and we will. We have time set aside to answer those questions. The question that always pops up is, will we share the recording and the slides? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. We will get that processed later today, get that out to you, to all the registrants. And so you can then share not just the recording, but also a summary of the session that you'll get in your email. Unlike other sessions, I guess, we've included suggested reading so you can study up and do your own research after this session's over, as well as training. So there are lots of training classes out there, and it's important that if you want to know more and are interested in pursuing CMMC, that you're going to need training. That's an absolute. So, you know, that's part of the whole process here. Please stay on mute if you can, and if not, then we will put you on mute so we don't get any background noise either during the discussion or during the Q&A. And we've come up with a quick agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, and we'll get the backgrounds of our speakers. So let's get started doing that. But before we do that, we always want to thank our sponsors. So without these vendor sponsors, we would be in dire straits. So for all the presentations we do, we make sure we give a shout out to all of them. And you'll all note that Summit 7's on the list of our sponsors. And so we are very grateful to them. And Joy can talk more about what they do and their value to you coming up. All right, panelists. Welcome, guys. Good to have you. Could you kick us off with just a little 2 minutes on your background and your knowledge and experience around CMMC, if you could? Joy, why don't you get started?
I'm happy to. Thank you so much, Steve, for asking me to join you today. Joy Beeland, I'm the Vice President of Partner Strategy at Summit 7. We are an MSP. We deal strictly with the defense industrial base. We are Microsoft Azure MSP, expert MSP, and we're the only one in the government space that's doing that. We also do Microsoft licensing for GCC, GCC High, and we are entering into the cleared systems space for Azure Secret for both secret and top secret cloud-based products with Microsoft as one of their leading partners. I have 21 years of having owned my own MSP, and I sold that practice back in 2018. I went to work for 2 of the MSP cybersecurity vendors in the space, and then I went to work for a C3PAO, and that's how I gained my knowledge in CMMC, in working for a C3PAO, and you all will hear a lot of acronyms. And I'm glad we have an acronym list, but really it's a third-party assessor firm dedicated to CMMC. And in that program, I stood up the 2 separate 5-day certification boot camps for assessors. I actively teach that still, even though I'm with Summit 7 now. And I was a provisional assessor, meaning one of the original group of assessors trained by the DoD directly. I have a DoD clearance, and I'm now a certified CMMC assessor, otherwise known as a CCA, in our industry.
Great. Joy, great to have you here. Thank you for taking an hour to share all this knowledge with us. Andrew, going to you.
Thank you. compliance specialist specializes in the smallest U.S. businesses. That's those with 10 or less employees that need to be compliant, and CMMC is one of those areas where small business is included. And so that's what we do hard work at getting them there. My company started I started working for myself in 2010, and Compliance Specialist was launched in 2020.
All righty. Andrew, thank you. Mark, over to you.
Hi, I'm Mark Jennings, and I'm with OTX Partners. I was a partner in an MSP for 32 years. That we were acquired by a major national MSP at one point, and I became the managing director of the DC territory where I am now. About 2 years ago, I set up OTX Partners as a service to help MSPs support each other in managing their risk and achieving compliance with the cybersecurity framework. Now, at that time, CMMC was a lot of the buzz. People really didn't understand it. We didn't understand it as a group. So we spent the last 2 years really looking into CMMC, what it takes to comply and what the certification process is going to look like. Frankly, some of the members of my peer group have decided they're probably not going to get into the business, and we'll talk about that more in this panel. So my focus on this and my approach is really from the MSP standpoint, and what challenges for the typical MSP CMMC presents, and the opportunities.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yes, we will dig into that. Before we get started, we just wanted to lay some foundational work around acronyms. So you'll hear several acronyms discussed during the session. But also wanted to just chat about the history a little bit. So Joy, could you give us just a couple minutes on where CMMC came from, how it was derived, and kind of what the status is today?
You bet. I'm going to go very high level. At the outset of CMMC, the most important thing to understand is that CMMC is a program that validates the implementation of a group or a standard of controls. That's NIST 800-171. So NIST 800-171 is a tailored set of controls out of the NIST control catalog that focuses on confidentiality of data. And the type of data that this is focused on is called CUI, which you have in the acronym list there, Controlled Unclassified Information. So this is information that is not intended to be public. It would impact the integrity of our defense systems, and that's why the government has decided that this category of information needs to be protected, the confidentiality applied in a certain way. So NIST 800-171 is the standard. It contains 110 cybersecurity controls, and the method for validating that is the CMMC program. Now, you're going to hear about FAR and DFARs and the Code of Federal Regulations and things like that, but basically what those are the legislative vehicles and the contracting vehicles that are being used by the Department of Defense and other government agencies to incorporate these requirements into the contracts of defense contractors. Right now, it's defense contractors. The DoD is the first government agency that's leading with the CMMC program to validate things have been implemented. And the reason that it's necessary is that we have nation-state adversaries like China, Russia, and other countries that are looking at the supply chain to the Department of Defense as a target-rich environment to be able to extract data that actually impacts the safety of our nation. So CMMC is the program that validates the implementation of controls meant to protect the supply chain. We're estimating 300,000 small businesses, or 300,000 businesses overall, will be impacted by this starting in January, somewhere between January and March of next year, Q1 of 2025, as it starts to go into contracts. A lot of the defense supply chain, as you know, is that a contract may be awarded to a prime, and the prime is required to share the wealth, if you will, in that contract through many small businesses, through a lot of incentives. And so these are very small companies. A lot of them leverage MSPs to achieve their compliance. And if they don't have these controls in place by Q1 of next year, they may lose the opportunity to bid on a contract or lose an existing contract. So it's kind of the bread and the butter of a lot of these small businesses that is at jeopardy and at risk. Okay.
Right. And if you sign a contract, if you look in the small print, sometimes you'll see there must be FAR compliance or DFAR compliance in those contracts. So if you haven't gone through your contracts lately, particularly with government suppliers, it might be time to take another look at those. All right, let's move on to our questions. Let's start with the big question. How should MSPs decide whether CMMC is really a practice that they want to get into, right? What do they have to invest in? What are the upsides? What are the downsides? You know, and what's driving that decision for your typical managed service provider? Mark, you want to start?
Sure. So the first thing you need to really look at in deciding is look at your current client base, because those are there may be some that are at risk. If you don't achieve compliance, you can't provide services for those that require the compliance. So if one of your clients is required to meet CMMC level 2 compliance, you as the MSP have to meet that same level. You have to certify. So, and we're going to talk a lot more about what the costs are and what goes into it. But understand, if you have clients that have that requirement, then if you don't achieve it, you're probably going to lose those clients. I mean, you will lose those clients. They really can't use you. So if you've got a lot in there, then that's going to drive your decision to say, yeah, we should probably do this. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the costs and the uplift that it takes to get there. So that's going to drive your decision. There is a lot of work. There's a lot of expense to getting CMMC certification. Now, we're also going to talk about the fact that there's going to be opportunities that you're going to be in a select group of MSPs, because not every MSP is going to be CMMC compliant. So those are the major drivers. Understand your existing client base, which clients would be at risk, and decide whether or not the cost and the challenge is going to be worth it.
Yeah. So Joy, the other day we talked about risks, right? So if a MSP is out of compliance, there are certain risks involved in that, right?
Yeah, well, the hardest thing is that not only is it very cost and resource intensive, it takes a long time to be ready for a CMMC assessment. Our customers are experiencing 12 to 18 months to be actually ready for an assessor to walk in the door. And 12 to 18 months for our customers, and we're helping them with a substantial amount of those controls. So when you look at an MSP that hasn't started to do an implementation, for them to understand what parts of their solution stack do they need to rip and replace, because you can't use just any tool or solution in service delivery if you're going to be aligning to NIST 800-171. Also, there's a huge cultural shift. Most of the staff are going to go through change fatigue with constant changes and updates. The level of documentation and maturity required is extraordinary. So the lift to get there and the time required is a huge undertaking. And the risk that we're looking at here is that the MSPs that haven't decided yet are actually risking the security of or the completion of that certification for their own customers, because the customers who leverage an MSP won't be able to get their own certification without their MSP being certified. And so they're willing to gamble the livelihood, if you will, of their own customers if they are not going full steam and putting both feet into this initiative. It's a huge risk in that way. The other risk is that there is definitely going to be liability involved. If you're performing, certain number of these practices on behalf of your customers, and then you stop doing it correctly and the customer gets breached, who is the DoD going to look at?
Well, so right, there's a cost of the audit, but then there's the risk of the breach, right?
Yeah.
If you're failing to comply. So Andrew, from a small business, small MSP perspective, how are they going to get up to speed?
Well, they need to get started sooner rather than later, for one thing. We partner with MSPs to help them get themselves compliant before we even talk about their clients, because most MSPs are not compliant, particularly with CMMC. It takes time to do this. This is not, I can't agree with Joy more. This is not an overnight thing. Oh my goodness, my client says we need to be compliant. We got to do it by next Friday. That's not happening. You're not even close. I also believe that a lot of MSPs will find out too late. And that's why I was very interested in being on this panel, to try and add the voice that says you need to get started yesterday.
So what does getting started look like? Joy, what, like, seems like a mountain. How do you take small bites
Yeah.
of an elephant?
I mean, obviously, we have some resources that I've provided and the other panelists have provided. Go out there and read NIST 800-171 from, cover to cover. Read about the CMMC model to understand the different levels and the different types of data that's included. But for myself, what I've seen the most success as a first step is to get yourself into what's called a CCP class, a certified CMMC professional. That's a 5-day boot camp. And when I was with Edwards Performance Solutions and we created that curriculum and started to offer those classes, in my very first class, we had 5 MSPs. I can tell you that those 5 MSPs have made more progress starting 2 years ago and are so much more knowledgeable than any other MSP I speak to. They really are being looked at as the industry thought leaders. The CCP class is the foundational knowledge of everything you need to know about CMMC. It's actually the first of 2 5-day boot camps that you would have to sit for an exam, go through the 5-day class and sit for an exam that is required for an assessor. So having an assessor's perspective on what an organization needs to do to be ready, and the technical implementation strategy and requirements is a huge benefit to an MSP who's going to be responsible not just for implementing it in their own business, but helping their customers to implement that. The other thing that I would suggest is that you don't ask for or receive guidance from somebody that hasn't been through a CCP class or hasn't worked directly with a customer to be ready for an assessment where they've brought them through a successful assessment. There's a lot of folks out there that are giving consulting advice and guidance that have never successfully implemented the practices or got a customer through an assessment. And I think that there's a lot of resources available that have those qualifications. So it's important to get the right advice and guidance.
So whether someone's taken a CCP class is going to start to be a first filter, right? That might be the first question you'd ask is.
I think so. I mean, I taught one of the CCP classes, and 4 out of 14 businesses in that class were MSPs. So it shows an investment that you're really taking it seriously, and the credentials mean something. It's a 3-hour exam for the CCP. It's a 4-hour exam for the CCA.
And it sounds like it's not a single person from an MSP. You're probably going to want to train 2 to 3 so you have backup within your organization, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how Mark and Andrew feel about this. It's hard because it's hard to spare a resource for 5 days to put them through a boot camp, plus the cost of the class, plus sitting for the exam. So it depends on the budget and the size of the MSP. We have MSPs in there that have 4 to 6 people, very, very small MSPs. And we have MSPs in those classes that have, 200 employees.
Right. So you have the whole issue of billable hours, right? They're not on the help
Yeah.
desk. They're not billing their hours because they're off taking those 2 5-day sessions. Mark, I think we talked about sort of strategies that MSPs can use, right, to comply with all the various requirements. Do you have any ideas or suggestions around that?
Well, I think probably the most successful ones are going to be those that either focus on this business in the DIB and get the certification, and really that becomes their vertical market, and they probably don't deal in other industries, or they might split off a section of their company, like even physically into another into another facility, so that they can make sure that part of their company is engineered and designed, and all the processes are all really focused on maintaining CMMC compliance. But yeah, I think an MSP that tries to do the all things to all people, or the jack of all trades, all industries, that's going to be a tough call, because again, the processes and the techniques that you need to employ, the tools, everything that you need to implement to meet CMMC certification, really have to be maintained, and all the processes need to be followed to a T. So, and your typical MSP that works in every industry, non-verticalized, is not going to have that discipline. So I think that's one technique to really look at.
I do want to throw out that if you decide to do this and become CMMC certified, you will discover that those practices apply to the other things. You will be covering things that are in HIPAA, you'll be covering things that are in GLBA, you'll be covering other industries, just because the NIST 800-171 is so thorough.
Well, so my question then is, can you hire people as an MSP who have been through the training, the CCP training? Can you buy your way in kind of that way?
You could. I mean, you could go on the marketplace for the Cyber AB, and that's one of the URLs that we're going to share with everybody. You can go on the marketplace and you can filter by the CCP designation and see the list of all the individuals that have gone through not just the 5-day boot camp, but sat for the exam. And then the next step is that they've undergone the background clearance check that I've done, and then they can see whether or not they've participated in 3 assessments, which qualifies them to move on to the next level if that individual wanted to. Now, the 3 assessment criteria and the background clearance is not as important to an MSP as knowing that they sat through the boot camp and passed the exam. That shows that they have proven knowledge around the CMMC program. But there's definitely a marketplace to look for those individuals.
Well, and I think, the challenge is this always comes down to, people, process, and technology. And so the skills that you bring in have to understand, what CUI is, how they handle it, how all the processes need to be put in place, that, when, let's say, you just onboard a new employee in a contract within the DIB, all of these processes need to happen. They all need to happen every single time. And if you don't have that, that really discipline within your technician staff, if you don't have, one of the things that I think is really going to be critical for anybody working in this space is automation. You can't really trust that everybody's going to do the same process at the same time every time. So if you build automation into your process for onboarding employees, or configuring certain devices, then you know that somebody's really just using a tool that's pre-programmed to be compliant. So again, those are some things that really, to be successful in this space, you're going to have to do. You're going to have to hire the right skills and charge for them. That's the other side of the coin here is, anybody doing CMMC work should be charging top rates and covering all those costs.
Right. So
It's
to-
important to get across to MSPs that what they're used to using technology is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people processes. We're talking about policies. Those are written things, and enforcement of doing things a certain way, like you said, every single time, because it only takes one slip up to cause a security incident.
Right. Well, so you're paying a premium for your CMMC certified people, right? And then you have to pass that along to your clients, which you should because you're adding a lot more value. But how about on the hardware and software, right? You have to be using tools that have been approved, right? And so what does that add to the equation in terms of both your infrastructure costs, your ongoing costs, but also getting your people to understand those tools?
Well, none of us can speak authoritatively on that right now. We can tell you where we think it's heading, where we've even suggested to the DoD and the Cyber AB based on how an MSP functions, where we think it should be going. But there hasn't been, right now we're in a period where the CMMC proposed rule is what we have to reference. And as a proposed rule, that means that they're receiving comments at the DoD. They're filtering through those comments to understand how they might improve or change anything in the proposed rule so that when it comes out as a final rule in Q1 of next year, or actually before the end of the year, most likely, but starts going in contracts by Q1 of next year, that wording, finalized wording, will contain the guidance that we need as managed service providers to understand the requirements and limitations on the security tools that we use. Currently, what we've heard from DoD is that they would like for any security, any cloud-based security tools to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent, which is a huge deal. There's very few tools available to managed service providers that meet that criteria. And this conversation today is not about vendors. It's not about us, stating it one over the other. There's a thing called the FedRAMP marketplace that you can go to see whether or not a tool that you are currently using is listed in the marketplace. But what needs to happen is vendors need to start the same as the MSPs that need to say, yes, we are going to be all in. We're approaching this strategically. We've got our plan. We've done our gap analysis. We understand where we're at and what we need in order to be ready for our assessment. This is the timeline. This is our investment. And we feel that we'll be ready by X date. MSPs need to say that, and they need to say it to their customers, obligating themselves, or they need to basically stand down. So their customers are not left stranded without an MSP when they think that they're ready for their assessment. Vendors need to do the same thing. Vendors need to take a stand and say, we are or we are not going to align with CMMC at level 2 for the NIST 800-171 practices, to give you a mapping of how we meet any of the criteria in a shared responsibility matrix. And we are going to be pursuing FedRAMP authorization or not, and what our rationale is for that. So right now, the vendor community has been fairly quiet. Very few vendors have spoken about whether or not they're going to meet that criteria. And some very large vendors leveraged by MSPs have not publicly, but I know for certain have said, we're not going to deal with that. And they need to tell that to all of their customers. They need to say it out loud.
Right. So you need to come clean, so to speak. You mentioned levels. So we sort of jumped over that. Can we talk a little bit just to make it very clear what the various levels are?
Yeah. Mark or Andrew, do you want to talk through the levels?
So there's CMMC level 1, which is really just a very basic cyber hygiene. You can achieve that through self-assessment. It's got 17 controls that are all basic, very basic stuff. Pretty much any MSP out there should already be compliant with that. They may not have their policies written, they may not have it documented, but they're most likely their practice is largely compliant. CMMC level 2, which is what Joy was talking about earlier, which is really 110 controls, it's there are actually determination statements underneath that equal really 320 actual criteria that you have to meet to certify. Now that requires, again, as Joy was saying, an assessment by a C3PAO. They have to come in, they have to verify that you are in fact compliant, and they'll give you your certification. Then there's level 3, which is really the highest end. Mostly, and Joy, you can correct me on this, but it's most likely going to be the primes that are going to be level 3, maybe some larger subcontractors, but it's level 2 plus another group of controls. And I'm not familiar with level 3 really at all, because we just don't deal with it in my group. But I don't know if you want to expand on that, Joy.
Well, level 3 is high impact system. So it really could be a very small manufacturer that happens to be creating a nuclear component kind of a thing. So anything that is high impact, mission critical would be level 3. Those companies, organizations would have to go through a level 2 assessment by a third party first. And then the DoD themselves will come in and assess additional controls that are pulled from NIST 800-172. So NIST 800-171 has 110 controls. NIST 800-172 has 25 selected controls that would be applied at level 3, and DoD themselves will come in to assess at level 3. So what we know from the proposed rule is that if you're an MSP supporting a customer that will have CMMC level 2 requirements, you also will have to have CMMC level 2 certification. If you're an MSP who happens to have customers that will be required to undergo CMMC level 3, then you as their MSP would also need to undergo CMMC level 3 certification, which means that the MSP will have to have DoD come in and assess their security posture as well.
So
very
there's
few MSPs support customers at that level. I think we have just over 900 defense industrial base customers at Summit 7. And I would say a handful of our customers are going to require level 3. So our goal at Summit 7 is to be level 3.
So if you're an MSP and you're supporting a small manufacturing company that is making screws for missile systems, then you are definitely going to have to be a level 2 and potentially level 3.
It depends on the contract requirements. The contract requirements will say, for any of our MSP customers, what level that customer is required to be. You can expect, though, that most of the defense industrial base will need to be level 2, even if their contract won't immediately require it. If you were a prime and you're looking at the organizations that help you deliver on a contract, and let's say you have 3,000 small businesses that, and this is common, that will help you to deliver F-35 fighter jet to the Department of Defense, I would look at those 3,000 businesses and whether or not their own contract ends up saying that they need to be CMMC level 2 validated by a third party. I'm going to tell them I want them to be, because I want them to be ready and waiting and have a healthy supply chain. And if they're not, if they're only planning on being level 1 because they think that's all that's going to be required, I may consider using somebody else for the sourcing whatever it is that they provide, just simply because I know they have better security. It's been validated by a third party. My liability is less, my risk is less.
Yeah. So customers are going to ask the MSPs are going to ask their vendors. So it's going to be, there should be a lot more communication going on up and down that chain these days than is happening. But eventually it's all going to come to a head. Mm-hmm. So the last topic, what have we missed? What else is out there that people should be concerned about? I mean, I think we've just touched on culture. It sounds like this sort of changes the people, it changes the processes that you work, but it also changes the culture within your organization. Andrew, how do you see that rolling through a small company?
It's the hardest step to make. People don't like to change, and they like to revert back to their old habits. It is probably the most difficult thing about becoming compliant to any of the standards is the change that you have to make within your company. And so it's very important that that change starts at the top. The boss needs to be on this full bore. If the boss says, "Oh, I don't care," don't bother. Don't do it. It won't happen. But it's got to be from the top down. This is something we're doing, and full support for doing it, no matter what it takes in terms of changes, in terms of documentation. I would say for the smallest MSPs, the level of documentation is probably the most culture shift, as they're used to just quickly filling out something and going on, and doing change control, where you don't change anything without approval and a look at what's being changed and why it's being changed and is it necessary to change it, etc. It's probably something the most small businesses and the small MSPs just are not used to.
Yeah. Culture's critical. Okay, great. Let us move to some questions. Here we go. Questions from the audience. Oh, Matt Lang's on. Are MSPs better off becoming staffing agencies rather than trying to comply themselves? Is that a way that they can get in the business with certified people, but not have their impact the rest of their business?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The staff augmentation is something that goes way back in the MSP industry. It's basically, you're putting a body on a site just to do what the client needs for their internal business. As I'm not really sure how the responsibility for compliance changes in that. If they are certified as practitioners or assessors, I don't know that the rest of the MSP is shielded from compliance. That's a good question. Joy, do you have any thought on that one?
I kind of read it this way, like if the individuals are going to be 1099 by the contractor, they're using the contractor facilities, the contractor equipment, and the contractor tools, following contractor policies and training, receiving the contractor's background check. Like they basically are a 1099 employee for the contractor, and the contract is with the individual as opposed to your business as an MSP. That's a very clear cut boundary. And I think that works. So if you've had a guy that has been the main person at John's machine shop for the last 4 years and they love him and you want to continue to support them, you may need to have some kind of an agreement in that way in order to avoid being requiring a CMMC level 2 certification yourself, because basically then that is an outsourced individual that is leveraging all the same tools, training, background check, equipment as the contractor themselves, and that falls 100% under contractor liability and responsibility. If your MSP as a business is providing for any of those capabilities or personnel, then your MSP needs to be CMMC level 2.
Yeah, and that's the point that I was going at is, again, it's, staff aug is one of the things that a lot of MSPs do, and that employee is still an employee of the MSP. They're not a 1099 contractor, an independent contractor. Yeah. So I think that doesn't shield you as an MSP from the requirements.
And what I said is not 100% certain. As an assessor, I know that there's a very clear boundary if you 1099. A very clear one. A lot more muddy if you don't do it that way.
Yeah.
Well, for example, if I'm a compliance officer for another company, but they're using their MSP, not me, then I would be in that same position where I'm the outsourced person, but none of my tools, my MSP itself, isn't in that business. It's somebody else that's in there. That would work.
So we have two more questions from the chat. Actually, more as they're coming on in. The physical requirements. Do you need a hardened data center? What sort of physical security do you need? And how might that be a cost or a challenge for small MSPs?
The physical requirements are pretty straightforward. Like you have to have every visitor logged in as they come in. You have to have a system where they're escorted throughout the building. They always have a badge on. They can't enter a controlled area unless they're qualified to. Things like that that pertain more, it feels like, to where sensitive data is. The data center itself, if you're using a cloud service provider, it must be FedRAMP. That's one of the tricky things about MSPs is we don't process store being a keyword, or transmit controlled unclassified information as an MSP, but we have access to that kind of information. So the data that we save is really what we would call security protection data. We've got passwords, we've got schematics of the infrastructure, everything that we do, every piece of document that we have is based around how do we protect our customers and keep their, network safe. That kind of data, that's an open question, whether or not the DoDs were going to require that the storage of that kind of data is on a FedRAMP cloud or using a FedRAMP tool to retrieve and perform the services.
Okay.
So far, that hasn't been the case, correct?
There's been no formal guidance, but there has been DoD saying that they would want the example they give is a SIM tool, and that they would want that to be FedRAMP.
Okay. A couple more questions coming in. If a client needs to be CMMC 2, and they go with an enclave, and the MSP, the org works and doesn't manage the enclave, can the org continue to work with the MSP?
Well, that's the thing, is that there's more to CMMC, like the physical part that I just said.
Yeah,
If you
right.
have, let's say that the customer has an enclave, but you as an MSP send a technician in to replace a printer that they use to print controlled and classified information. You could actually break their compliance if you walk in without having the proper signing, badging, being escorted, logging what you do. The training is to be around anything that has CUI, the configuration of the printer being 100% according to the configuration or the baseline required for CMMC. So there's a lot more outside of the enclave that an MSP performs capabilities of than just an enclave. It helps tremendously to have an enclave managed by an MSP that will be CMMC level 2, but that doesn't give a free card for every other service or capability.
Cool. So Cameron's getting right to the point. Is there an average size of an MSP or a minimum size or a range? And is that average size today going to be different a year from now?
It depends. We have MSPs I know that are killing it, that are 6 people. They have like 3 techs, but all they are focusing on doing is the DIB.
Yep.
Right. And again, a couple of them were in my CCP class 2 years ago. They saw what the opportunity was, and they've spent 2 years retooling and hiring smart so that all they do is CMMC. You can be very small and do this successfully.
Right. Conversely, you could have a 200-person MSP and they just do it as a sideline, and they're not getting traction because they're not focused and serious, and they haven't changed their culture, and it's not permeating through the organization. Right.
Well, I think because of the costs and the uplift that it takes, nobody's going to do it as a sideline. It's going to be strategic to their business. So I think the small MSPs are going to be more rare than the larger ones. Although, ironically, I believe it's probably easier to control a 6-person MSP and make sure everybody's following the same process than, let's say, a larger organization. But you're not gonna dabble in CMMC. It's, that it's just one of those things you have to have the investments in money, time, and the discipline that it requires is, you're either in it or you're not.
Yeah, you're all in. You bought in.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dashika wants to know the FedRAMP cloud providers. Are there 5, 6 that are kind of household names out there? Or
Oh, you can go on FedRAMP Marketplace. Just Google that, FedRAMP Marketplace, and you'll see
Okay.
the providers.
okay,
I just really strongly don't want to mention vendor names. It feels wrong to me. I'm sorry.
okay,
I'm happy to have
There's
one-off
only-
conversations, but not on something like this.
And there's only 300 up there, so it's not, you can scroll through the list pretty quick and you can see all the names that you recognize. And a lot of the names that most MSPs, standardize on their tool sets are not on there, as Joy mentioned earlier. It's,
Yeah.
there's, the big player out there. Yeah, they're there, but the other ones, not so much.
Mhm.
so let's talk about resources and training. So for folks on this call, we assume you're on the call because you're interested or you're engaged. Where can you find more information? Here's the Summit 7, simple steps of how to get started. This is probably the place you should start to start building out your knowledge, I would say. And it's focused on small to medium businesses, right, Joy? So it's the right target, right audience, right level.
Yeah, I mean, that's our guidance to the contractors themselves. It might be a little different for an MSP, but since we don't have anything baked, a regulation to follow that we know is 100% ready on MSPs, we have to kind of do our best.
Got it. Great. Thank you for doing that.
Mhm.
Some other resources, the MSP Collective, there's the URL right there. A couple of accreditation organizations, institutes. These are, you could spend weeks and weeks studying this, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of material here.
Yes.
Yeah. And then training, Edwards has the training class and there's the URL.
Mhm.
You can take other training courses. And so any comments or guidance, these are all useful and helpful.
Yeah, the Edwards Performance Solutions. I stood up that program when I worked there, and I still teach for them. The CCP class, you will find if you go to the Cyber AB Marketplace, which is the second bullet there, and look for training providers, you'll see that the CCP courses will range anywhere from like $600 to $6,000. The exact same curriculum, but delivered different ways. The Edwards Performance Solutions is right in the middle. It's about $3,000. And that's the one that I've seen and personally instructed so many MSPs in that class because they rotate their instructors throughout the 5 days. You get a bunch of different perspectives from actual assessors who are out there doing assessments. And so I personally recommend that one. This is the one area that I break my rule of not talking about vendors, simply because I've had so many MSPs tell me that they just absolutely love that class. But again, you can go on the marketplace to pick one that's right for you and right priced.
Got it. Great. All right. So top lessons learned. What do you guys think? What would be 1, 2, 3? If you're going to take this 50 minutes and boil it down to 3 things.
Know what you're getting yourself into.
Number 1.
It takes much longer than you think it will.
Number 2. And Andrew, number 3.
Takes a lot of commitment.
Culture. Yeah. Commitment and culture. Great. Yes, exactly. Great. All right. So tomorrow morning, you guys wake up, you have your coffee, you're running your MSP. What things are you going to do? Here are just 3 potentials. The bottom one, I call it cost benefit analysis, right? I think of spreadsheets. You get all your costs, your hard costs, your soft costs. You look at your benefits, which would be revenue, but also brand value and business value. And you do one or the other. You subtract one from the other. I think Joy's talked about the gap analysis. And so I think the gap analysis would be a must do as well. So number 3A or number 4 would be do that gap analysis and figure out where you're at, right? Where are your clients at? What are they going to demand? Where are your people at? Do they have the inclination, the skills to take this on? And then, get involved in the training.
Mhm.
Anything else for folks for tomorrow morning? What should they focus on? Hearing none?
I would go to the DoD website and I'd read through the model and the 110 controls just to kind of get your head around it, and then talk to the different training providers about the CCP class. Those would be my first things that I would do if I wasn't familiar with CMMC.
Great.
The other thing is ask your customers if they have DFAR 7012 in their contracts, because sometimes the customers are not aware or kind of turning a blind eye to the fact that they have these requirements. I'll put that in the chat, the actual DFARs 252, 204, 7012. If that's in a customer contract, it's likely that they're going to be required to have CMMC level 2. And that means that you would also, if you want to retain them as a customer.
I agree. I think that language is sitting there in contracts that people haven't read and they've just glossed right over it. And they're going to bite them because they're not aware of it.
And that is, as I started, understanding your existing client base and which ones are at risk. I mean, you may have a certain a significant amount of recurring revenue that would go away if you're not CMMC certified on level 2. So just understand that. Just find out what in your client base requires it.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's something to do tomorrow morning, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, I got a couple slides on the NSITSP. Once a month, we have an open mic around legislative or regulatory topics. So first Tuesday of each month, the registration is on our website, NSITSP.org/events. So you can sign up and attend that, have those discussions. We're having a session coming up in May on the 2nd around valuation and growth. So understanding different ways to value your business and then understanding the levers of how to expand that valuation. So we have a expert coming in to talk about the sort of the analytics involved with valuation and growth. A couple of links. This is just for reference about information on the website and membership. So some of you out there on this call aren't members yet. So you need to go to this NSITSP.org/join and join today. So for the $120, you get a full year's membership and it can attend sessions like this. And if this wasn't worth 5-6 times that membership, then I'm not sure what we're missing here, because the value that you'll get out of that is exponential compared to the low price there. So I don't have any shame about selling. This meeting, the recording is going to be posted. It's going to be posted on the website as well as our YouTube channel. So it's out there. And then I just want to say a huge thank you to the panelists for bringing your experience, knowledge to the session today. For all you attendees that ask questions, thank you for those. The chairman of the legislative committee who couldn't be here today is Dennis Wilson. His contact's there. If you have any questions or if you want to volunteer for the legislative committee, I'm sure he would be happy to chat with you on that. So we've used up almost the whole hour. This has been perfect. Any final notes, comments? Joy, Mark, and Andrew?
Please connect with me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Yeah, there you go.
Me as well. And thank you for hosting this, Steve. This has been a good session. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Everybody, we will stop sharing and we'll turn off. And everybody have a great day. and a great week, and we'll see you on the next session.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
All right, thanks. See ya.